Who is the most boring fighter in the UFC, or some of the most boring fighters in the UFC? That's what I want to come on here and talk about today. Either these guys have the personality of a tomato, a boring fight style, or a combination of the two. That's going to depend on if they go in S, A, B, or C. And yeah, obviously the S tier is going to be the boring personalities and the guys who fight to decision every single time. And then the C tier is going to kind of be the guys that maybe they have a great personality, but their fight style kind of sucks. So either way, let's get right into it. Starting off with Bo Nickal. I'm putting Bo Nickal in the A tier. Listen, Bo Nickal, first of all, this guy talks like an absolute NPC. If you've seen any of his interviews ever, he literally talks like a NPC in a game where like you choose option A or B. Like, what should I say, A or B? That was a great performance by me, blah, blah. Bo Nickal is an absolute bot, as some people call him Bot Nickal. And yeah, man, especially after that last fight against Paul Craig, and the fact that the UFC continues to put this guy on pay-per-view main cards, pushing him down our throat whenever he's underdeveloped and just not ready for the big stage. I think Bo Nickal at the A tier is fair. Let's move on to the next one on this list. We got Marlon Chito Vera. I'm going to put Chito in the B tier. Listen, Marlon Vera is one of the most frustrating fighters you'll ever watch, and this guy has a lot of third-round finishes because he just will sit there and pitter-patter for the first 2 rounds and do absolutely nothing. Then out of nowhere, he'll land like a big head kick or a big knee or something, or a big front kick to the face. Something crazy in the 3rd round. But if you ever watch this guy fight, in the first 2 rounds, he's absolutely boring. He's kind of an NPC on the mic. He's okay. He seems like a nice family guy, but I'm not going to lie, man. Especially recently, Chito's fights have been really boring me. The most entertaining thing he's done recently is get his ass whooped by Sean O'Malley. So, yeah, I got Chito in the B tier. Let's move on to another NPC, Amir Albazi. Now, this guy looks like he was AI generated. I can't explain it, but his face just doesn't look real. And I'm not going to lie, I did take pleasure in seeing Brandon Moreno beat the brakes off this guy just because he almost goes out of his way to make it a snooze fest. Like, do these guys just hate having fun fights? Like, it just seems like a guy like Amir Albazi is like allergic to having a fun fight. Like, it absolutely must be a snooze fest, or he's not happy with himself. And yeah, man, it was good to see Brandon Moreno kind of fraud check him and show, hey, I'm still at the top of the flyweight division. And Amir Albazi on the mic, this guy is no, like, Conor McGregor by any means. So definitely goes in the A tier. Let's move on to another fighter on this list, Colby Covington. I'm going to put in the C tier. Listen, Colby Covington, as we know, just got his butt kicked by Joaquin Buckley over the weekend, and now he's making every excuse in the book. The reason I'm putting Colby in C tier is because this guy hasn't had a finish, and he has like one finish in the last like 8-9 years. Doesn't finish fights, talks a big game, always fights to a decision, and even his fight against Masvidal, I didn't find it that entertaining. His fight against Buckley this weekend, not that entertaining. His fight against Leon was awful. Fair enough, his fights against Usman were pretty solid, but outside of that, man, we're grasping at straws. Colby, his fight style is pretty boring. He is entertaining on the mic to some degree, so I have to have him in the C tier. So yeah, Colby Covington in the C tier, I think is fair, boys. Let's move on to another one. We got Shawn Strickland. I'm gonna go to war for you freaking guys. Shawn Strickland talks about going in a war every single. You know what? I'm gonna put Shawn Strickland in the B tier, just because his fighting style is so much more boring than Colby Covington. This guy throws teeps and jabs for 5 rounds, and he either loses a close decision or wins a close decision. That's literally his entire career, unless he gets KO'd like he did against Pereira. And yeah, man, the fact that this guy sat out and cried about a title shot and got rewarded for it by the UFC, knocked him down, knocked him on this list for sure. But Shawn Strickland, his fighting style is one of the most boring in the entire UFC. He lacks knockout power. He lacks finishing ability. He doesn't have any submissions. He doesn't have any power on the feet. He doesn't throw any kicks. Like, Shawn Strickland's fighting style is literally just copy and paste every single fight. He does the same thing every single time he fights, which is why I think DDP is going to beat him in the rematch, because DDP can actually switch it up. But Shawn Strickland, the only guy to talk about going to war, and then pitter-pat Paulo Costa to a decision for 5 rounds. So I got to have him in the B tier. Some people might even have him in the A tier. Let's move on to another guy. We got Shavkat Rakhmonov. Now, I have been the Shavkat Glazer myself, guys. I've went on record to say this guy, Shavkat Rakhmonov, is going to murk Ian Gary. He's going to run right through him, and he's going to go up and run through Belal. But I cannot deny that whenever this guy wants to stink it up against the fence, he's going to stink it up against the fence. He did it against Ian Gary a whole bunch. He stalled a bunch in that fight. He did it a ton against Wonderboy. until he was able to get a takedown. And it is frustrating to watch. Like, I was very frustrated watching this fight against Wonderboy, just watching this guy hold up Wonderboy against the fence, struggling to get a takedown because Shavkat's offensive wrestling isn't the best. And he did it again against Ian Gary. He stalled out a lot in this fight when Ian Gary was low-key the one trying to make it entertaining. So respect to Ian Gary. And I like Shavkat. He is one of my favorite fighters. And the fact that he had a 100% finish rate, that in itself is entertaining. But the aspect of he has negative personality, and he's an aura merchant, and he holds guys against the fence. So he had to barely make it on this list in C tier. Still entertaining to watch to some degree, but when he holds guys against the fence, sometimes I just want to go take a bathroom break. I can't lie. Let's move on to the next one on this list. We got Leon Edwards. I'm putting in the A tier. Listen, Leon Edwards, he just kind of fights to the level of his opponent, as we saw against Nate Diaz. This guy fought Nate Diaz and made it a snooze fest. The only entertaining one of that entire fight was when Nate Diaz rocked him with a 1-2. Then he fights Usman in the third fight. That fight was boring. The second fight was boring until he got the head kick. It's like the Leon Edwards versus Colby fight was super boring. Leon Edwards is just not an entertaining guy in terms of his fighting style and in terms of his personality. He tries to be Mr. Perfect in the cage. Every strike has to be thrown with perfect technique. Nothing can be dirty or dog-like. It all has to be beautiful and perfect. Otherwise, he can't throw the strike. That's how Leon Edwards fights. Mr. Perfect. And whenever he does fight like he has that dog in him or like he wants to go for the kill like he did against Belal Muhammad, he cut Belal Muhammad open at the end of their fight. So it's like this guy, if he pulls the trigger, he could be so much better, but he just doesn't pull the trigger. So I got to have Leon Edwards in the A tier because he is pretty boring. That's why he's becoming one of the most forgettable champions in the UFC, in my opinion. Either way, let's move on to another guy. We got Israel Adesanya, and this is specifically champion defending Israel Adesanya. I'm going to put him in the C tier because he does have cool walkouts. He does make the press conferences entertaining with his cringe one-liners, but there's no doubt in his rematches with guys like Marvin Vettori and his fight with Jared Cannonier and his fight with the rematch with Robert Whittaker, just coasting Izzy. Even in the Strickland fight, that fight wasn't entertaining. The most entertaining thing was just Strickland dominating him. But outside of that, Izzy coasting and just leg kicking and jabbing at range and staying on the outside and winning a 49-46 boring decision throughout most of his title reign against a Yoel Romero, against a Marvin Vettori, against a Robert Whittaker, against a Jared Cannonier. All those fights, man, he's just so boring. It's like the only time he's not bored is whenever he has a chip on his shoulder, whenever he loses the belt to a guy like Alex Pereira, whenever he's forced to fight against a guy like Drickish, So we need contender Izzy. Champion Izzy is boring, so he had to slide in at the C tier because although I think Izzy's cringe, his cringe one-liners do make the press conferences in the UFC more entertaining, and he is an active fighter, so respect to him. Let's move on to another fighter on this list. We got Shawn Brady. Where do I want to put Shawn Brady? I'll put Shawn Brady in, I guess I'll put him in the B tier. I don't know, man. B tier, A tier. He's like in between. Shawn Brady, bro, the fact that this guy got finished by Belal Muhammad makes him boring. Like, bro, you got to be pretty dang boring to get finished by Belal Muhammad. Shawn Brady, he has a jiu-jitsu style. He's got negative striking, and he's kind of an NPC on the mic. I guess he's okay. He's a decent guy from Philly. He's got some cool tattoos. So I guess that in itself can maybe bump him up to the B tier, down to the B tier from A. But no, I'm not ever super excited to watch Shawn Brady's fights. Whenever he fought Gilbert Burns, I can't remember. I think I almost took a nap during that fight because I had a long day at work. But either way, Shawn Brady's kind of an NPC on the mic. Doesn't say anything super entertaining, so I do have to have him in the B tier. Speaking of guys in the S tier, let's go to Merab Dvalishvili. You guys, I worked so hard for this, you guys, and I am so happy. Guys, Merab Dvalishvili. Maybe he shouldn't be an S tier just because of that press conference. What about Jacuzzi with Umar Nurmagomedov when he went off the rails? But I'm sorry, man. I cannot put this guy. Man, you know what? Yeah, I guess I'll move Merab down to A, man. Jeez, I don't... Merab's going to be like in the middle of A and S. I'm going to have him in S, but I don't know, man. He is entertaining on the mic to some degree. He makes the fights fun, but his fighting style is so dang boring. Just spam takedown, spam takedown, spam takedown. Literally, his entire fight style is cardio, spam takedown, spam takedown. He shot 49 takedowns against Petr Yan. In his fight against Sean O'Malley, the main event at the Sphere, was such a boring fight to watch. Like, that was such a disappointment of a fight. Merab didn't look impressive. O'Malley didn't look impressive. I will say that it's hard to put Merab in the S tier of boring whenever he did have that exciting exchange with Umar recently, and they were going back and forth, and Merab was literally having like a mental breakdown over fighting Umar. So maybe you could put him A tier, but I am going to keep him S tier just because this guy has 10 fights or 11 wins in the UFC, 10 decisions, and only one finish against Marlon Vera, who's been finished by everybody, who almost finished him. So, and you guys know me, if you watch this channel, I am a favor of finishes. I think guys should get the finish and stop fighting to pitter-pat decisions. Either way, let's move on to another guy that's in A tier. Alexander Rakic. Do you remember when this guy is coming up in the UFC and he fought Jimmy Manuwa, and this guy got that sick head kick KO against Jimmy Manuwa? And we were like, man, how exciting is Alexander Rakic? This dude is going to go on a freaking tear. Well, what do you know? Now he's on a 3-fight losing streak, and this guy finds a way to make it, whoever he's fighting against, an absolute snooze fest. His fight against Magomed Ankalaev was a snooze fest. All of his fight against Anthony Smith, snooze fest. His fight against Jan Blachowicz, who's getting his legs chewed up, a snooze fest. I can't remember the last time I've seen an exciting Alexander Rakic fight. Fair enough against Yuri, because he was kind of beating the brakes off of Yuri, and Yuri autismed his way back to a TKO in round 2. But this guy just is such a boring light heavyweight fighter. Like, at least Johnny Walker goes out there and gets like Looney Tunes KO'd every time, you know? It's like Alexander Rakic just finds a way to make it boring. So I got to have him in the A tier. He came up as what seemed like a dangerous guy in the division, but he's been a decision merchant for a long time now. He hasn't had a finish in like 5 years since that Jamie Manuwa finish. So yeah, got to have him, almost 6 years. Got to have him in the A tier, especially for a light heavyweight that's supposed to, he looks like a guy that have a ton of power, but he just doesn't show it anymore. So A tier for him. Let's move on to another guy. We're going to go with Mateusz Gamrot. I'm going to put him in the B tier. I'm not going to lie, whenever I watch Gamrot fight, call him Scamrot, because this guy is supposed to be one of the best grapplers at lightweight. And he is, but his lack of finishing ability recently, man. He went from a guy who was on a 3-fight finish streak, where he was fighting guys like Scott Holtzman, Jeremy Stevens. He was finishing those guys, and out of nowhere, he moves up in the division, and he's a decision merchant. When's the last time Gamrot got a finish? I couldn't even tell you. This dude's a decision merchant. He's losing split decisions against Dan Hooker in 2024, which is not the best look. You got to be destroying a guy like Dan Hooker in 2024. How good is Tattooed Hooker? But listen, man, I'm just not pumped up for a Gamrot fight ever. Like, I just know it's going to go to decision. Fair enough, he had great scrambles with Arman, and he narrowly beat Arman. I think he lost that fight, but just recently, I have not seen any fights where I'm like excited. Like, dude, you saw that Gamrot fight, man? It's just not entertaining. So I got to have him in the B tier, just because his wrestling scrambles are somewhat entertaining. And he fights at lightweight, which is always exciting, I guess. Maybe you could put him at A tier, have him at B tier. Let's move on to another fighter on this list, Magomed Ankalaev. I'm going to put him at the C tier. Ankalaev, he's boring, but he does have a lot of knockouts on his record, and which is underrated. And he is like got a record in the UFC of like 12-1 or 11-1, something crazy like that. He does have a lot of knockouts on his record, which is underrated aspect of him. But man, this guy's personality is that of like a wet paper bag. And his fight with Alexander Rakic recently was very boring. And I think this is, in turn, partly why he hasn't gotten a title shot against Alex Pereira, because the UFC doesn't view Ankalaev as like a very exciting guy. Like, he's going to be another champion to stink it up, like the other guys who just wrestle hump or just fight to close striking battles on the feet and then go to decision every time. I mean, Ankalaev does have some finishes against Johnny Walker, against Jan Kutalaba. I forget who else, but he has finished some guys, and he does sometimes have exciting performances, but don't deny this guy's ability to stink it up, especially in that fight with Jan Blachowicz, whenever he took it to the ground after getting his legs chewed up. That was one of the most boring fights, and that was a main event. They gave him a main event, and he kind of stunk it up, so got to have Ankalaev on this list at the C tier. Let's move on to another guy, Jailton Almeida. Jailton Almeida, A tier. I'll come back to him. Movsar Evloev. I'm putting Movsar in the A tier. You've got to be A tier if you have 9 wins in the UFC and 9 decisions. And this guy just got another decision win against Aljo, and I was not impressed. We're talking about a guy in Aljo who couldn't take down Sean O'Malley, but then went up to featherweight to kind of low-key ragdoll Movsar and kind of expose his wrestling defense. Aljo was low-key ragdolling Movsar in the wrestling. Fair enough, he was reversing the position sometimes, but Aljo was kind of taking him down whenever he wanted. And he looked like he was right there. And Movsar is jacked out of his mind if you've seen this guy at featherweight. So for this guy to come into the UFC, right? He came to the UFC on a 2-fight KO streak. And then he gets to the UFC, and now he can't finish anybody. 9 wins, 0 finishes. Like Ilya Taporia said, man, finish somebody, man or a woman. So I've got to have Movsar at the A tier. You already know if you're watching this guy's fight, you're going to be watching it for 15 or 25 minutes, depending on if it's a main event or not. Does he deserve a title shot? Maybe. I think he should fight Diego Lopez in a rematch. Who knows? But this guy's just never impressive, man. Like, I never watch a Movsar Evloev fight. I'm like, man, I'm so impressed. So, got to have him at the A tier. Let's move on to the last A tier fighter, Gilbert Burns. Oh, my goodness, Gilbert Burns. This guy is in freaking snooze fest, dude. I haven't seen an entertaining Gilbert Burns fight since whenever he got finished by Usman. What was that, 2021? And before, Gilbert Burns has not gotten a finish since 2019. And he hasn't looked impressive in a long time. I mean, the last time he looked impressive was against who? Tyron Woodley, like in 2020. Outside of that, man, he's won fights here and there. But this guy's a decision merchant. His last finish was against Neil Magny in the first round with an arm triangle, I believe. But he's a decision merchant. Gilbert Burns, boring. He's washed. He's okay on the mic. His entertaining moments. Actually, let me take that back. He did have a banger of a fight with Hamzat. So let me not be a casual. I will point that out. His Hamzat fight, that was the last entertaining glimpse of Gilbert Burns. In the last like 3 or 4 years outside of the Hamzat fight, he's just been a snoozer, a guy that, you know, whenever you watch his fights, you might need to go take a pee-pee break. You might need to take a nap. That's what I'll say about Gilbert Burns. Dorino in the A tier. Let's move on to another guy in the S tier. We got Belal Muhammad. Nobody remembers his name. Bro, the security at UFC 310 didn't even remember Belal's name. That's funny. Either way, listen, I think I'm putting Belal way above Marab. Belal is going to be at the height of S tier. Belal is, in my opinion, is one of the most unimpressive champions in UFC history. This guy has like 1 finish in the last 9 years, and I'm just not impressed. Nothing he does impresses me. His striking's not impressive. His grappling is, I guess, a little impressive. No submission ability, no knockout ability, doesn't ever seem to try to finish the fight. When have you saw Belal genuinely try and go for a finish outside of maybe the Shawn Brady fight, which he had to land like a 250 punch combo on his face to get a finish? When is the last time you seen Belal genuinely try to finish a fight? Maybe Stephen Thompson, but even then, man, he wasn't putting in enough work. It's like he does just enough to dominate his opponent to win the fight, clearly, but never puts his opponent in any danger. Does that make any sense? Like, I feel like you're at the least amount of danger in a fight if you're fighting Belal or if you're fighting Marab. There's just no danger factor. Not to mention, this guy has the personality of a wet paper bag. Nothing he says is entertaining. Yes, guys, I'm a Belal hater. I just don't find anything about him entertaining. I don't like to watch his fights. I don't find him entertaining. I think he's boring. I think he's in Luf Shavkat. And yeah, no, he does not have hands like Canelo. So I got Belal in the S tier. I don't think anybody's going to find that as a surprise. Let's move on to the next person. Aljamain Sterling. I'm going to put in the B tier. Listen, man, Aljamain Sterling, B tier. I will say Aljamain in the lead up to fights, he does say some interesting things, like his lead up to Sean O'Malley. He tried to sell the fight. He called Sean O'Malley high fructose corn syrup, which was pretty funny in my opinion. So he does to some degree try to sell his fights and try to be entertaining, but I can't have him any higher than B because he has pillow hands and he hasn't had a finish in quite some time outside of one arm TJ, who was his last finish. It was Corey Sandhagen like years ago. So yeah, Aljamain Sterling, Mr. Pillow Hands, which is quite crazy considering this guy's absolutely jacked. You think he's have some of the most power in the lower weight classes, but he just doesn't, man. I don't think he has a single knockdown in the UFC. So Aljamain, the human backpack at B tier, because he does, he just try to make it interesting. He has some good scrambles. He's one of the best back takers, so there is some entertainment value there. But overall, I'd say he is a little bit of a boring fighter. Let's move on to another guy in Gelton Almeida. I'm going to put in the B tier as well. Listen, some people will put Gelton in S tier or A tier just because of the Derek Lewis performance, but there's something to be said about Gelton Almeida. Outside of the Derek Lewis performance, he has fought to a finish, whether it be losing or winning, in every other fight in the UFC. He got KO'd by Curtis Blades, and he's finished every other fight outside of the hugging fest against Derek Lewis. But I have to put him on this list because this guy's diving for the legs the second the fight starts. He's looking to try and finish you on the ground, and if he doesn't, it's going to be an absolute stinker. If you've seen Gelton Almeida versus Derek Lewis, that is one of the most stinker/boring fights you'll ever see. Like, if you're looking for a good way to take a nap, if you can't sleep at night, just go throw in that fight. Guaranteed you're going to get some good rest. But I will say he has adopted that kill or be killed mentality, trying to take guys down like Curtis Blades and finish them on the ground, finished Alexander Romanov, going up against Spivak. So he is entertaining in the sense of he finishes fights, but if he doesn't finish the fight, as shown in the Derek Lewis fight, he could be extremely boring, and he has no personality. I mean, he's Brazilian, he doesn't speak English. So yeah, this is my list of the biggest snoozers in the UFC, the biggest boring homies. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Where would you move some of these guys, up or down? I could arguably move Amir Albazi to the S tier. He's so boring, man. I don't find anything interesting about him, but can't have him up there with Belal and Merab. They're just boring. You know what? I'm doing it. Actually, I can. I'm putting Amir Albazi in S tier, and I'm putting Merab at A tier. Merab he makes skits. He's funny outside the octagon. Yes, his fight style is extremely boring, but there's just a press conference along with Umar recently. Got to move him down to A tier. Amir Albazi's in the S tier. That dude literally goes out of his way to make everything about his entire UFC career stinky. But yeah, this is my list, guys. A little switch up at the end. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you agree or disagree with any of these placements? As always, I appreciate you guys watching. Leave a like if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. I'm out, guys. Peace.